Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here for lowpost.com, and I'm back again with the next lesson in our Scratch Dailies tutorial series. And in this lesson, we're talking about exporting our dailies or our timelines out of Scratch to then take them and deliver them wherever they need to go to. Now in this lesson, we're going to be focusing on the render module, which is not only a very intuitive interface to work in, but once you see how visually things are laid out, what looks originally daunting when you first take a look at it is actually a very easy workflow to navigate your way through. Alright, so as you can see, we are in the construct module of Assimilate Scratch, and I want to draw your attention over here to the left. We talked about this in a previous lesson, our versions versus our timelines. Now this is not so much talking about that because we already covered that in a previous lesson. It's more so to show you that we have a little bit of a roadmap or a legend here on the left side of the screen to direct us or guide us as to what exactly is going on with this window. Now, talking about rendering, if I come back down here to the render module, you'll notice that we have a similar legend over here on the left telling us that what we see in the middle of the screen right now is our output tree. Now what I had actually done in the construct window is that I had renamed my sequence to be Kevin's timeline. Now if I come back down here to the render module, you'll see in the node right in the middle of the screen, this node represents my timeline. At any point I can click on the node and click the play icon to actually be taken to the timeline, just to verify that everything that I need to be here or need to see is here. Okay? Now, what's going on above and below? Well, you'll see we have something above called publish, something below called report. Let's talk a little bit about publish first. What the publish media window is going to do is it's going to let you publish to the cloud. Now, when I say the cloud, what I'm actually referring to is to Scratch Web, Vimeo, YouTube, or Facebook. Using YouTube as the example, you can come in, enter the relevant information here, simply click OK, and your upload to YouTube will begin. Now, because we're not uploading to YouTube or any of the cloud locations, I'm simply going to cancel out. Now, down below the timeline node, we have the reporting window where we can come in and generate reports. Now, as of this recording in version 9.1 of Scratch, what's going to happen when you generate your reports is they are going to be HTML files. Now, the one advantage to HTML files is the fact that they can be altered after the fact if you need to. Now there is some updates coming to 9.2 of Scratch that I'm going to talk a little bit about in the next lesson, just to kind of give you a little bit of a teaser about what's coming to the report generator window. Now I'm just going to come down and I'm going to say cancel. Now I did say that this window represents the output tree. Now to be honest, this is kind of more like an output trunk of the tree because we really don't have anything branching out from it right now. Now the easiest way to show you a branch, if we want to call it that, of our output tree is to get in and use a preset. Now where do we talk about presets and how do we find presets? Well, presets are actually located right down here in the lower left hand corner. They're referred to as output templates. Now you'll probably remember back to probably one of the first lessons, if I close the project and I come back here to the project settings, we actually have the ability to get in and apply that default output template right here inside of our project settings. You'll notice there are all the output templates. Now Scratch defaulted to Avid Dailies because it is the first one in the list, but I'm going to show you later how we can create our own output template and use that as the default. So let's just say okay, let's step back into our project. We'll come back to the render module, and I am just going to choose the Avid Dailies output template just as the example because it has a good branch, actually two branches going on that we can get in and talk a little bit about. So all I'm simply going to do is say apply. You'll now see that we have our tree with our branches coming off it. Now each node in the process is going to perform a different function, whether it's to add burn-in, whether it's to reframe the video, whether it's to actually create the specific file with a specific codec. Like I said, each one of these nodes is going to perform a certain task. So basically what's going to happen is our timeline is going to go on a little journey through our output tree. The very first step that's going to happen is that burn-in is going to be added. Now I don't know what burn-in is going to be added yet, but we'll come back to that in just a second. Now next, our branches split off. They branch off, for that matter, into two separate outputs. In the first output, our footage is going to be reframed to 720p, some type of watermark is going to be added, and an MP4 H.264 file is going to be created. In the other branch, we're going to reframe our footage to be HD 1920 by 1080, and then it's going to be encoded as DNx HD36 for an Avid Media Composer. So we sort of know what's going on, but we don't really have any of the specifics. So let's talk about the specifics of the burn-in. Now, once I select burn-in as opposed to selecting the timeline, if you take a look down here at the bottom of the window, you'll notice that our parameters change. As soon as I select the burn-in, I now have the ability to come in and see what text is being input. Now, you'll notice that we are on the 6th input here. I'm just going to go all the way back to input 1. And you can see that this is going to be the source file information, the source name, the source's timecode, the audio file, the sound roll, and the audio timecode. Now, all this information is great and everything, but it doesn't actually show me what it's going to look like. So how would we go about seeing it? Well, much like being able to select the timeline node, hit that little play icon and actually be able to see the timeline, if I come back to the render module and I select burn-in and I do the same thing, you'll now see that what I'm actually being shown, if I zoom back here, is that information. You'll see there's the inputs here that give me, the source's name, the clip name, the time code, the audio file. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that if for some reason, like for example, I didn't have my audio linked to this clip, these inputs would be blank. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, you also have the ability to get in and add text in here as well if you want to. Now, instead of me getting in and typing in text, what I'm going to do is head back to the render module and show you that this watermark right here is actually text that was simply typed into a box, resized, and positioned wherever we wanted it to be. Basically, a burn-in on the screen so that we know exactly who this footage belongs to. Okay? So as you can see, a very visual way to work, but then again, sometimes you just need to see what's going on with your clip. So for example, with Reframe 720, I can see that this output setting is going to be using 1280 by 720, and it's going to be taken and fit to the width of the frame, so we'll have a letterbox at the top and the bottom. Now this is great and all, and to be honest, I could go through every one of these nodes, but what I want to do is I want to get in and I want us to create our own output tree, something that we're going to use for us to output our timeline to, so you can see how each step of this process works. All right, so let's delete all of these nodes. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to select one of them, and you'll notice we have a little trash can icon there that I'm simply going to click on to remove all of the nodes that are nodes or branches, more or less, that are attached to that tree. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create our own. So I'm going to come back here to my output settings just to start right from the very beginning. You'll notice that if I don't have anything applied to this timeline, it wants to export it as a .exr file, which don't worry about that. We're going to make sure that we're outputting to the correct file type as we move along the tree or the branch for that matter. So the first thing I want to do with my timeline is that I want to do my conversion first, my 720p conversion and my 1080p conversion, because maybe with my two clips I might want to have different burn-in information, or maybe on one I want to have burn-in information and on the other one I don't want to have any burn-in information at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new node. I can do that one of two ways. You'll notice right down here it simply says add node, and I can choose one of the nodes to work with. Or for me, because I'm normally working up here in the output tree, I'm simply going to click on the little plus icon and I'm going to choose a transformer node. Now, what we're going to do is we'll do our 720p conversion first. So with this node selected, what we want to do is we want to come down and I'm going to change my format to be 720p 30, and then what I'm going to do is just change that frame rate to be 23,976 frames per second. Now, what's important to keep in mind about what I've just done is that it might seem like I've come in and set this up to be 720p. However, all I've actually done right now is make the frame 1280 by 720. So basically we've just cut off a large amount of information from our clip that was there originally that is not there now. So how do we go about fixing that? Well, what we're going to do now is come to the format settings. And in here we can now change our scaling to fit this to the width. So it's basically going to take this image that's 2048 by 858, a scope aspect ratio, and it's going to shrink it down so that this side of the frame and this side of the frame are here and here, with letterboxing at the top and the bottom. You'll see, very visual. Now, something else that's important to keep in mind is to keep things straight in your head, because we do want to make sure that we stay as organized as possible. Is we're going to call this 720p transform. And as soon as I say enter, that's going to update right here. Now, what you might think that we're going to do next is come back to add another node for another transformer node, and we're going to make this 1080p. However, by doing this, we run into a little bit of a problem. What we have is a scope aspect 2048 by 858 that we're shrinking down to 720p that we're then going to re-enlarge to 1080p. No, that's not right. We don't want to apply this node after the 720p transform node. We want to apply it with it. Now what I mean when I say with it is I want to come back to my original timeline. I want to add another node right here, another transformer node, and you'll see that this is now where things branch off into our two different workflow branches. Now again, much like we had done before, what I am going to do is I'm going to come down to my format with this node selected. We're just going to switch it to be 1080p, and I do believe I have 23 right there, so 23976. We're going to make sure that our format settings with it selected, we're just going to fit it to the width just like such. You'll notice not as much of a change because 2048 by 858 and 1920 by 1080 aren't that far off from each other. Okay, so our two transform nodes are fine. Now what we're going to do at this point is with this timeline is I'm just going to output a ProRes file. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to click on our create a new node. I'm going to come to ProRes encoder. You'll see there's our ProRes encoder, and again ProRes encode. Okay, now with this ProRes encode we can now come to our format settings. I'm just going to set it to be ProRes 422. Now we have 6 audio channels, so if I wanted all 6 audio channels I could simply turn them on right here, and this node is now all set to go. Now with our node up here, I'd actually like to add some burn-in information. So let's come up here, let's add another node for burn-in. And what we're going to do with this burn-in node is I'm going to simply click on it like such. Now I'm not going to enter all of the information that we'd entered before, but I'm going to show you how you can change things up just a little bit. We had talked about our metadata hashtag information. So for example, if for our first piece of information I want it to come down, and let's say I wanted to use the source name. If I click on source name, you'll notice that the source name is input. Now I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger here. Let's just make it like 30 point size. Okay, that's good. So it's put in the source name. Now I know it's the source name and you know it's the source name, but to be honest, what does that mean to anybody else? It doesn't really mean anything unless you know how the shots are named. So what I'd really like to do is actually get in and tell people what this is. I want to tell people that this actually is the source name : space. So you'll see you now have the ability to get in and to add your own information, as well as stepping in and working with the built-in metadata inside of Scratch to really get this information in and put it exactly the way that you need or want to have it. Okay, now this is good enough for the purposes of me showing you this, because I wanted to show you how we could get in and combine this information together, and even show you that you can get in and adjust things like where it's justified, spacing, and things like that. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now I'm just going to set the spacing back to 0 because that doesn't really matter. And let's now head back to our render module. So one last thing that I do want to put in here is I want to put in our MPEG encoder. So let's do that. I'm just going to simply click on the add new node button. I'm going to come to my H.264.265 encoder, and of course again we're just going to call this H.264 MP4. Okay, again, much like we had done before, we're going to come to the format settings. Now, to be honest, 10,000 is a little bit much. I think we're just going to go with, I don't know, let's just go with around 4,000. I think that's probably good enough. Again, we can get in, add as many audio channels as we need. If we needed 6, we can add them all in there. I'm going to leave everything else the way that it is. Now, with all of that being said, we have a little bit, I'm not going to call it a problem because it's not a problem. I'm going to come back to my output settings right now, and what we've been setting up for is we've been setting up for a dailies output. So basically what we now have is 2 types of files are going to be created. One is an H.264 screening clip of each one of the clips that I want to have from my timeline represented as a separate clip. The other branch of the tree is going to create us the high-res ProRes files that are going to go with that low-res MP4 file. However, if you take a look down here to the output right now, we have MP4 selected, you'll see that it's just going to create us a file named H.264 space MP4 file. Now we can get in and change that, don't worry about that for right now. The problem, like I said, is the fact that it's actually creating me a single clip file. Okay? What I need to do is I need to tell Scratch that I want to output this as a dailies workflow. So basically, Each clip that's represented in my timeline is going to be exported as a separate clip, and in the case of the MP4 file, that timecode information, or shot name for that matter, is going to be burned into each one of the clips. So how do I go about telling Scratch that I want to do that and output these as separate clips? So let's talk about that. All right, now I kind of teased it just a little bit here, but I'm going to come down and click on the Set button again. Now you'll notice that we're now in the file name specification window. And right now you'll see that our timeline is going to be called H.264 space mp4.mp4. Now the reason that I named it that is because I don't really care what this is called. I'm more so concerned about what it's called on the node, not so much what the file name is going to be called, because we're not exporting a single timeline. If we were exporting a single timeline, I'd worry about what the name of it was. But because we're going to be exporting for a dailies workflow, the goal is to have the clips that are exported to be named after the source name of the clip so that they match the original camera raw. Now you'll notice right now it's called hashtag name.hashtag extension. We love our hashtags inside of Scratch, but the only problem that we have right now is that it's the wrong hashtag name. I don't want hashtag name. I want hashtag S name, or the source's name, just like such. So what I now want to do is I actually want to come in and I'd like to insert the project name right there in the beginning. So what's going to happen is a new folder is going to be created with the project name in it. Okay? And then what we're going to do is with the project name, we're then going to come in and create a new folder called MP4 Low Res. Okay? And then we're going to have the files be put into that folder. Now what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to create a template for this. I'm going to call this Kevin's MP4 export template. Okay? And we're going to say add. Now you'll see that we now have it in our masks drop down right there. So what we're going to do is simply say OK. We're going to select our ProRes encoder and we're going to do the exact same thing. I'm now going to come down, we're going to come to set, I'm going to come to my MP4 template and I'm going to apply it. However, in this case we're going to do something slightly different. In this case we're going to have things going to our ProRes good quality folder before we create those different clips that have the source file's name to it. What I'm now going to do is simply say OK, and these two output modules are now all set to go. So what we now need to do is to get in and queue them up in the render queue for it to export to the desktop. Okay? Now what I am going to do is just, instead of having it go to the users folder, I'm going to have it go to my desktop. I love having everything on my desktop. This is fine. Let's set that one to the desktop. Let's set this one to the desktop. Okay? Where is my desktop? There we go. Perfect. Select. Let's now take this node and we're going to add it to the render queue. Now you might think that as soon as you add it to the render queue should appear. It's not going to. Don't worry. Why? Because in many cases you'll be queuing up multiple items at the same time. So let's add that to the queue. Let's now go to the render queue here where we have our two exports all set to go. Now at this point all we now need to do is to simply start the render queue like such, and you'll notice that once I say start and I say yes, what's going to happen is that these outputs are going to be queued up and they're actually exporting at the same time. Now one thing that I love about Scratch, and the reason that I always come back to it, is that it's fast. When you're exporting, it is super fast exporting these files. And what I also love is the fact that I can now come in, I can say continue. You can actually get a visual representation on each one of the nodes as to exactly what is going on with your export. However, what you probably didn't notice was the fact that I just closed the render queue and it's rendering. And now what I have the ability to do is to come back here to any one of the different windows while it's rendering, and it's going in the background. Now what's important to keep in mind is I don't want to mess with the timeline that I'm currently outputting. Okay, so at this point what I would probably do is come back, maybe I'd come in, create a new timeline. You'll see inside of my timeline here I can actually see exactly what is being rendered at any given time, because it tells me with this visual rendering icon right here. So I could create a new timeline, bring in some new clips, start working on, a different camera card, really whatever I needed to do. As long as, like I said, I'm not messing around with the timeline I'm currently outputting, I can keep working while Scratch renders in the background. And like I said, One thing you'll notice about Scratch is that it is super fast. If I come back over here to our render tab, it's rendering both of these at the same time. They're already almost half done while it's going through the process of not only down converting, but also adding our burn in and then doing the file conversion, all basically at the same time. Okay, so we're going to let this finish here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to head to the desktop, and I'm going to show you exactly what Scratch has done with its rendering. Alright, so as you can see, we are on the desktop, and take a look at that. Scratch has created me a folder that has the project name on it, exporting our project, inside of which is two folders, one called MP4 Low Res, one called ProRes Good Quality, again, much like we'd set up inside of Scratch. And here now is my low res 720p file with burn in at the top, some of which Scratch input, some of which I input. And we also now have the corresponding ProRes file at high quality for us to send along with its low res counterpart. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, let's just close all that up. Let's Command or Alt and Tab back into Scratch. Now, this is all fine and good and everything, except for one problem. I really like this output tree that we've set up, and I'd really like to save this as a template to use in other projects that I'm going to be working on. So how do we go about doing this? Well, one problem a lot of users run into right off the bat is they're going to have a node selected, and what they think they're going to do is come down here to the output template, simply punch in whatever name they want. They're going to say save, and they think that they're all set to go. However, what's important to keep in mind is that the way that saving templates works in Scratch is that with this node selected, if I come in and create a template, what's going to happen is the template is going to consider everything that's downstream from this node as what's going to be included in our template. So for us, if I want to include everything downstream from the node that I currently have selected, I'm going to want to select our main timeline node. So this way, both branches of my output tree are going to be considered when that template is created. So let's come in, let's call this Kevin's output template. Appropriately enough, what we're going to do is we're going to save that. Now you'll notice it has now been put at the top of the output templates. And what we're now going to do is just delete the two branches, like such. So let's now close the project. Let's now come into our project settings. Let's come over here to apply as the default output template. You'll see that we have Kevin's output template selected as the default output template for us to use. I'm simply going to say OK, and let's enter our project. I'm just going to create a new timeline. We'll just call this new timeline, appropriately enough. There we go. We're going to import. I'm just going to import a single clip to drop into my timeline. I'm going to say open. We'll just drop it in. We're going to jump over to the render module, and as you see, because my output template is set to be the default output template, the tree automatically populates itself, and we're now all set to go, assuming we did everything right in all the stages up until this point. All right, now as always, if you have any questions, you have any comments or ideas for upcoming lessons or courses, I want you to head on over and post them in our forums at lowpost.com/forums. And if you have any questions for me, you can always send them to kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com.